Peace, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Sex on Shuffle. I am your host, Cindy Lee, your succulent sexologist, here with another amazing guest, the magical, you hear my thighs, Jennifer Driver. Amazing work, amazing human being. I'm going to let her talk about herself. Hi, I'm going to let you talk about yourself because I'm talking like you're not in here. I'm so excited to be here to have this conversation.
I'm excited to be here with you.
Because I know we talk to each other in the various spaces that we work together, but to be able to really hone in on all the goodness that you have brought before I met you, during I met you, and what the future holds for you as a reproductive health and rights and justice advocate, and doing this work, particularly with policy. And I'd like to, highlight your consulting, right? You as a new founder, and
Yes.
what future you see for us as sexuality professionals, for us in terms of incorporating justice into our work and what it means to steward our communities towards whatever liberation looks like for us.
I love that. Yes, I love that.
Yes, talk to me. Hi.
Yes, hi. I am Jennifer Driver, she, her pronouns. I always start off by telling folks that I am from Alabama because I think it really shaped how I look at not only policy, but the field of sex education and who has access to what, and the type of sex education that you receive, depending on where you live, even if it's zip code by zip code, state by state, whatever. As you mentioned, I just started this new venture with consulting. That's interesting. Take Root Strategies. I struggled with the name. Actually, that was not the name that I originally came up with, but I forgot the name. That's how anxiety inducing starting a new consulting business is. But I got the LLC back and it was the name that I went with. And here I am. I work on policy in the reproductive health, rights, and justice space. Anything from sex education to condom availability, contraceptive access to abortion. You name it. This is what I work on. And currently one of my biggest projects is really looking at system involved young people. So youth and juvenile justice and foster care, and how we address sex education in various institutional settings.
Because there is no one size fits all, which happens sometimes in our field.
There's not. And people want there to be. Like, they're like, okay, I want to do this with everyone. And that's not how that works. I want to use this one same curriculum with every single population, regardless of who they are, where they're from, just anything. This is the one I want to go with. And I want to go with this one because it's the cheapest. And
for 20 plus years.
Right. Exactly. I evaluated this program in 1969. It's 2020 and it'll still work, right?
Right.
So it's interesting.
I hope there's shifts happening because of so many of us that already know that things will change as soon as we publish today. There can be a shift.
Yes, that's why online stuff is so great, right? Because you can go in really easily, update it, and and constantly make those changes that need to happen. It also, in some ways, can make it more accessible, right? Like if I have to wait for something to be mailed or have to, publish like a book piece, and to your point, then it's outdated the second I publish it and put it out there. So it's really challenging to do that.
Yeah. And with the nuance, right? Because there are still folks that don't have access to internet. So we know that there's still a need for published things, but it's just to rely on it, right? Like to rely on this curriculum as if it doesn't have updates, as if the young people haven't told y'all and us. Like I know myself, my young people be like, really? Let's talk about sex?
So that's right. So for like to keep it updated, I think is really helpful for it to be somewhere digital. I agree with you on the publishing it for access if you don't have internet access. I mean, again, from Alabama, there are parts of Alabama it takes us like 4 weeks just to get some type of mail, much less if you're even going to get internet access. So um, we're riding around with the little things on our cars just so that we can get some type of service
Right.
out there. So yeah, I agree. There needs to be some publication. It just needs to, we just have to figure out how we keep things updated, and or if we don't, let people know, look, I published this here, you're going to need to keep updating this because even as it hit the press, it's already outdated.
And I think that's the issue that comes up when it comes to these grants that are rooted in certain policies, right? But these grants want these evidence-based curricula as if there is no limitations in the evidence and as if it's going to stay as updated as it was. Because I think from myself, I think our field needs to do better. And I know that our field has lack of access in comparison to like other fields doing other kinds of research, right? Sexuality education is not prioritized. And still, especially for folks who have experience on the ground, we know that what it feels like to not be prioritized and still support the folks that we're supporting in the ways that they need it.
That's exactly, so sexuality education is not prioritized at all. I branched out, I do really broad because it allows me to bring in funding to help supplement the work that I do around sexuality education, especially around policy. Policy is not funded, really at all. But there was something that you had said around those grants. That's what it was. Those grants will get you every time. So they want you to come in with this deficit frame, name all the things that are wrong with the community, but you're supposed to go and take this little 8-week program, 12-week program, and that's supposed to change some outcomes.
Right.
And like, what is that? And so, and why policy is so important to me is that I feel like through that work, we can change agencies who are funding these, especially those federal grants, right? Putting people in positions who know about community and know what it's actually going to take to actually get these outcomes that you're wanting. But this deficit frame 8-week program for $5,000 is not getting it,
Right.
and so we have work to do.
Right. So let's scale back a little and bring up, the work around sexuality and how sexuality can be so interdisciplinary and we can come from all these different walks of life. What led you either to sexuality or, whatever came first, sexuality or the policy piece? Because I know there's I've heard your story about how you got into policy, but I want to know if sexuality came before, during, or after that. Like, how did they mesh?
The sexuality actually came first. I was doing sex ed programs in Atlanta, actually. And then I had received this project to do it in Alabama and Georgia. But the education parts of it came first. We were delivering curricula throughout Georgia. And that was my love, training educators, working with young people. I connect a little bit better with adults who are going in to work with young people. So, I think there are people who are really strong at connecting with young people. I'm really strong with connecting with adults and who are going to be working with the young people. So that's where I knew my lane was. But it was always the sexuality part and helping people who did not get quality sex ed, which is the majority of folks, improve the sex ed education that they were going to deliver for young people. So that's how I got into it. And then the policy piece I fell into mainly because seeing who wasn't getting sex education. When I was doing this work, it was, we were doing these programs and we were facilitating sex education curricula to Black and brown folks. But the folks who were getting comprehensive sex education were white kids.
Right.
In these school systems. And that was not okay, obviously. And so I got into policy because of looking at, the barriers and the access piece. And that's how I kind of fell into policy.
Mm-hmm. And it's so necessary, considering I know for myself, I didn't learn a lot of policy outside of volunteering at Planned Parenthoods and lobbying, right? Like that was my only lived experience around policy, because I've always been in the understanding like, yes, policy exists. And I also know we have to find ways to kind of fit within it, like whatever parameters that exist, how do we still need to make whatever accommodations we need to make for our communities. So I can't imagine the labor of even getting the policies that have been put in place. So what was your work or your experience in the particular policies that you worked with or worked around or like prioritized?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it was anything from kind of at the state level, developing the like drafting the legislation, meeting with legislators to even say like, hey, sex education is missing in your state. And here's what, here's what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what we need to focus on. And so that was at the state level, but even at a very micro level, working with school districts and saying, hey, I know you're underfunded. And at the same time, we need a strong policy to say, yes, we can be able to do sex education in the schools, because, as much as there are teachers who do want to do sex ed, they're worried. I'm not going to lose my job over something that I really want to do if we don't have a policy for. And so it needed to be uniformed, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as I said, sex education can vary by state. It also varies classroom to classroom.
Mm-hmm.
If I get, Miss Cindy Lee Alves as my teacher versus whoever, Cindy Lee Alves knows sex education, right? She
Mm-hmm.
knows how to facilitate this. If my cousin is in the next classroom and that person doesn't want sex education at all, doesn't want to do it, then they're not going to get it. So I'm getting sexuality education and they're not, just based on what classroom I show up in, if that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
No, absolutely. Because that shows that if these fidelity checklists from these curricula come out with positives, is it necessarily because of the curriculum that you created, or is it instructor specific? Is it
I think it's both,
right, right.
right? I think it's the curriculum, but I think it is all about who's delivering the program. And in the how they're delivering it. If I have this really dry teacher who's doing this and facilitating this, I'm gonna tune them out, right? Because that's
Mhm.
boring. But if I have someone with a lot of energy, someone who can connect it, understands kind of the real life experiences of young people, those young people are going to connect more. Also, when you can see yourself, whether you're LGBTQ, right, or whether you're Black, you're brown, whether you're an immigrant, if you can see yourself reflected in the curriculum that you're receiving, then it's going to hit differently,
Yeah.
right? And so that's been some of the struggles that we've had. And I think policy allows us to account for some of these things, right? So policy will ensure that that there are teacher trainings. It will ensure that the right folks are coming into the schools to do these, deliver these programs. It will ensure that folks' lived experiences, regardless of where they come from, allows them to be reflected in the information that they receive. And that's what I really love about policy, the ability that policy has in doing this work.
So can you say, in your experience of when you started getting into policy to now, because some folks just get into the field and get disillusioned or jaded, but has not seen the trajectory. Do you think that we have been in an upswing in terms of increasingly more susceptible to having comprehensive or more support, or does it still feel like the same as when you first got into the work?
Oh no, I feel we are definitely making strides, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I first got into the work, the framing was all public health, right? It was a
Mm-hmm.
teen pregnancy prevention programs. It was HIV risk reduction. Um, and that's really where the states and districts and folks and communities were at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was being funded. Now you're seeing, and there was no talk about BTQ folks, at all.
Right.
And that was that. Not to, and when you talked about a Black kid or a brown, they were talked about from, oh, you're coming from this single parent household, more likely to get HIV, all of these negative indicators. And that was the framing that was being put out there. And then on top of that, we were putting out these bullshit lines around success sequencing. And I was trying to think of it. There's just no other way to say it. This idea that you have to finish high school, graduate, go to college, get a job and marry before you have kids. And that's what's going to take you out of poverty. Get the fuck out of here. Like, no, like that's not how that works. And so I think that what you're seeing now is a pushback, hopefully more so than what I had seen in the past, of the success sequencing. There's a pushback and a rejection of kind of this teen pregnancy prevention framing. And we've come so far on what we know around HIV and AIDS, right? And so there are different messages that you're seeing around that, especially from a policy standpoint. Do I think that we have come far, like that we still have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I do think that we've made some strides.
Yeah, because I want to bring up that nuance, because sometimes it feels disheartening, but then we also need to look at where it was. And it's a slow progress, and it doesn't deserve like these accolades from these people in power that are putting that in place. Like, it's not to give them a kudos, but it's to show the work that's been done by the folks doing the work as much as they can, like regardless of the pushback.
The other thing that I will say is I see a lot of work happening underground that doesn't get the visibility. And it's on purpose, right? That they're doing this behind the scenes so that they can continue to do this.
Right.
There are places that are doing, so for instance, I'm in the DMV area. So in Maryland, very, moderately red state. It's starting to go a little purple, but mostly red state. And these very conservative pockets that are actually doing comprehensive sex ed. Deep down in red part of Virginia, doing comprehensive sex education. Now, they're not going to bring attention to it because they don't want it to go away. And they haven't made it a political issue. They know the benefits of comprehensive sex education. And so they're doing it. And so in that space, to me, I think that there are a lot of wins happening that they may not hit you or be right in the face.
Yeah.
But there are success and wins happening.
Yeah. And I think that's a good transition to tying into what's happening currently in terms of our political climate, right? Like, folks are seeing whatever president was selected, right? Like, there's still, beef around whether or not a president was selected. But I think it just connects to what you're saying, because regardless of that being a thing, like whoever our president is, the work is being done locally, right? The work is being done on the ground.
So that's what I constantly remind people, right? So we looked at this election cycle. We have all dealt with the trauma and the frustration of what has just happened. We know Trump is leaving and Biden is coming in, right? But at the same time, people were paying attention so much at the federal level. Not enough attention was being paid to very localized levels. My fear, especially as it relates to sexuality education, kind of reproductive health rights and justice, kind of the work, is that so much backward stepping happened under this past election that we have a lot of work that's going to need to take place 2021 and beyond. There were a lot of conservative, red, Republican, anti-sex education, anti-choice legislators and localized members who were elected to their position, but nobody was paying attention to it because we were all looking at that clusterfuck of a presidential election, right? And so my fear is, because we weren't paying attention, there is a lot of defensive work that we're going to need to do in the near future.
And finding a way to balance having to mobilize that and continue whatever progression it is that is happening.
That's exactly right.
So For sexuality professionals or for anyone who's listening and wants to be invested in doing this work, where would you direct them to in terms of being more aware of what they're doing locally or what's happening nationwide in terms of policy and sexuality and sex ed?
That's a really good question. So what I always tell people at the local level is really pay attention to who's running these school boards, right?
Mm,
Who's making the decisions at the very district level, and how are they showing up? So in Gwinnett County in Georgia, I could tell how their district was going to be and where they were, what movement was going to happen around sex education based on one or two of the board members that were over kind of the Gwinnett County Board of School Board.
mm-hmm.
And then from there, I look at who's, heading up the state board of education in your state, right? So what is their background? Where are their general stances on sex education, like what have they been saying? So that's another place to start paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would look at who's being elected as state legislature and your state legislature, so in your state houses, because that's going to kind of be the head, and all of the other things will generally it'll trickle down. It'll also trickle up, but it'll trickle down. Change happens when, movement or something rumbles up at the very community level. And then, the state legislature generally will follow. And then sometimes it happens in reverse. The state legislature will do something and then it'll trickle down and change happens. But I to your point, really looking at those very localized spots is how you're going to see whether, how your state or localized area is going to do related to sex education. At the federal level, I think it's going to be much as it's been for a while, a standstill, especially depending on how the Georgia, we're taping this today, how the Georgia election shakes out, right? So if Ossoff and Raphael Warnock win, you may see a little bit of movement. I don't think you'll see a full-on comprehensive sex education bill pass, right. Even though that there is one and we need it to. But I think that it will mean one party controls all, the White House and both chambers. And so that there could be some movement happen. If they don't win, it's just going to be another stall. And so there's not going to be a lot happening at the federal level.
It's another roadblock to whatever progression is happening.
That's
it's not going to stop it necessarily. So out of all of this, of what's happening politically, have there been any glows that you can bring into this space in terms of wins at the local level that you're aware of, even if it's like DMV related?
I mean, I think that there has been, in DC, they are trying to move towards sex positivity in their sex ed programs. They want to talk about pleasure in sex ed in DC. Now that's DC, right? And so that's a win. Like, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if someone was saying, hey, I want to talk about pleasure, look at Joycelyn Elders, and talk, all of how what they thought was radical back then. Like, they are talking about pleasure in the DC public schools is what they're hoping to do. There are places like Vermont who passed a bill that was really to start addressing racial justice in the school systems.
Wow.
Which, you're right. That one didn't get a lot of attention. I think Vermont is happy that it didn't, because that allowed it to pass. Right. But they are, talking about microaggressions and talking about power and privilege and, much further than what most school districts will be doing as it relates to racial justice. And then even in like smaller states, right? Smaller, like my home state of Alabama, they are adamantly working to remove the harmful LGBTQ language from their state statute. So, not the biggest, it's something, right?
Right.
It's those incremental wins. The other thing that I will say, South Carolina is another one that I think should get a little bit of shine for what has happened there. So South Carolina, for a long time, prohibited you from talking about LGBTQ young people in sex education or in schools. Teachers were not allowed to say it. So much that when I was doing the trainings for them, they were like, hold on, I can't say this in the school district. A lawsuit was filed against the state of South Carolina, saying that was unconstitutional.
Wow.
Our side won. And so now teachers must acknowledge LGBTQ young people and their lived experiences when teaching education in South Carolina. So that's really big. Washington State just, they had passed legislation to mandate sex education.
I saw that.
Yeah, the opposition came back and was like, no, we don't want this. Let's take it to a vote. They put a ballot initiative in November, and the voters overwhelmingly said, yes, we want a sex ed mandate. And why that is so important, I think people don't always talk about why that is so important. Most states, right? So California, Colorado have the comprehensive sex education, right? So if you teach sex education, it must be comprehensive. There's no mandate though. So there's nothing to say that you have to teach sex education. The problem with that goes back to my earlier point. Most folks who are getting sex education or comprehensive sex ed are white. So if without that mandate, at least there's a disparity on who's getting quality sex education. Washington State said, oh no, we are mandating this. And so you have a stronger opportunity to reduce the disparity among who gets sex education. And so that's why that's so critical. So yay, Washington.
A big deal, especially when you take it from the stance of that it's not necessarily a mandate, because even if it's put into place, it doesn't have to be a mandate.
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's a big deal. But then even still, I think about the folks that are going to be mandated. What does that look like in terms of what they already have limited access for?
Now that's where policy and practice needs to improve, right?
Yeah.
So we can put the policy in place, but the actual rollout of it needs a lot of work.
And I think that's different.
That is completely different. And that's where we still have a lot of work to do.
We will never not work. I see.
We will never not work. Yes.
Oh,
we won't get paid much, but we will never not work.
Listen, there's so many layers to this. All right, so talk to me about the journey, and as much as you want to say the journey into making the decision to be your own founder and doing this consultant work and still doing it with the lens of policy and reproductive justice.
So this journey was not one that I had planned on doing. I've been in this space for about 12 years, 13 years, given the math. Math is hard. But I've been in this space for a long time now. And I have worked in predominantly white-led organizations. The only one that wasn't white led and was the majority Black folks was GCAP, surprisingly. The Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Power and Potential used to be pregnancy prevention.
Yeah.
And it was run by, ever since I had been there was a Black CEO. 98% of the staff was Black. So that organization reflected what Atlanta looked like, right? So we were in Atlanta, so it reflected Atlanta. So they did a really good job on that. But any other organization that I had worked for, white led, white board, white.
Yeah.
And so that brought a lot of challenges. I remember sitting in one of the meetings of one of these white-led organizations, being the only Black woman around the table, and the board chair, a white man who is still really prominent in the field and puts out a whole bunch of stuff around sex education and teen pregnancy, compared the Congressional Black Caucus to bottom feeders. And I was like, oh, so no one's gonna say anything? No one, none of y'all. We're just gonna be okay with this? And I was like, oh, this is how y'all do. So if you say this and I'm sitting at the table, imagine what do y'all say when I'm not, when we're not here? like, because you have censored yourself enough for this room,
Right.
or maybe you haven't. But so that was that. But what I realized in my time, especially over the last maybe 3 to 4 years, 5 years, I had been burned out. I was burned out. Like, this field, as much as I love it, had just kicked me, and I just couldn't. I needed a break. So I left my job that I had been at for about 3 years or so, in the middle of a pandemic, left without a job, and was like, okay, it can't get much worse. So Tracy Gilbert, I credit her a lot for like pushing me a little bit. It's like, you need to be doing your own thing. And so I did. I left and started Take Root Strategies. And what I've been so thankful is that the partnerships or the relationships that I had while doing this work, immediately I had contracts to do this work. And so, I have been and so it just reaffirmed like this was the right decision, and I'm happy. Like, we're still in a pandemic, and I'm not stressed of work.
Right.
And and if I do, it's my stress of my own making, right? Not the stress of these white-led organizations who aren't going to do what's really needed for sex education, right? Who, you and I have talked about this, who want to do racial justice, but not really. And so I was tired of really fighting for what racial justice should look like within these organizations and the messaging that was coming out. The last thing I'll say around this is I was working with, in one of these organizations, and they were trying to reach like the Latinx community, right? But they refused to put an Afro-Latino person on any of their publications. They're like, that's a Black girl. And I was just looking, I was like, this is what we're doing. We're doing that. Yeah, it's time.
Racial justice, right? We're gonna conflate
but you want to
ethnicity.
scream that we are doing racial justice, but that's what you want to do. Okay. Yeah.
And that's why we need to get clear and intentional when we talk about racial justice, because it can't be racial justice if anti-Blackness is still in play.
That's the thing. There is so much anti-Blackness, but no one wants to have that. Like, they're not ready for that conversation, right? They want to say racial justice, but when you bring up anti-Blackness, and so then the conversation shuts down. What I've also realized, Cindy Lee, is that they don't actually want to talk about racial justice. One of the things that I have noticed in this field is they will say LGBTQ, 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 left, front, sideways, whatever. But the minute that you bring up racism, the conversation, well, why do we need to talk about that? Why is that relevant for what we're doing? And I'm like, oh, so you don't understand this field at all. You don't understand what the work is. So yeah.
And that's the problem, because you know, when we work behind the scenes in those ways, we see that. But then when you do your press releases and highlight the work that you've been doing or that your employees have been doing,
that part,
you want the accolade. And I feel like, what does it look like to want racial justice and not want to do it for the sake of not wanting to be held accountable for not doing it? Right?
That's right. You don't want to appear racist. You don't want to appear out of step with where everything is, but you don't actually want to do the work to change what is needed to be changed, or to address what's needed to be addressed. Right. And you're not willing to give up anything, right? Or make space.
That's the thing. Who said it? I forgot who said it, but it was equity feels like oppression to the privileged, right? So they're uncomfortable with having to give stuff up, or they're uncomfortable with when you ask us what can we do, and the first thing I say is quit.
Right. Yes. Oh no, that's too far. I can't do that.
That's too much.
Yes. no, we'll just go and hire or underpay a person of color to come in and do this work for us and get the accolades. And that's what we've done. And, it's not sustainable, because what you're doing is you're burning out really qualified folks in the field. And once they leave, the work kind of leaves with them, because there's no one to really know how to do it.
Right.
Because it's not to the core of who your organization is.
Right. And yet you want to keep that intellectual property because you think that shows face. But we've been known that we can tell when it's not sustainable, or when it was somebody that left and left that legacy.
We all know who is doing the work, right?
Right.
I know who in this organization is doing that work and who in this organization is doing that work. So regardless of who is talking about it, I know, and like folks in the field know, like, oh, that person actually was doing that work, you know?
Yeah.
So you're not fooling anyone. We know who's doing the work.
Right.
So
at the very least you're getting in the way, right? Like, how can you leverage your power and privilege to let folks thrive with their ideas and their commitment to the work, instead of burning them out with whatever you think is professionalism?
And even worse, you are able to get funding for work that folks have been doing for a very long time, have invested their blood, sweat, tears into the research and study of this work. But because you are, you have money, or you are a well-known organization, or whatever that is, you get the visibility and you get access to where people have been like fighting. I think about it in tenureship, or like teaching at universities. These white folks who come in and teach Afro studies or something like that. And you're like, really? I had to fight to be an adjunct here to teach this, but you're sitting up here like teaching this stuff and have done nothing.
Yep.
And
it's an audacity, right? Like, I know programs that have Black faculty and they just so happen to be the only staff that's non-tenured, or
correct.
The only staff that is adjunct. But yet the brilliance from the adjuncts, you're going to say, look at us, we're so inclusive.
That's exactly right.
But not enough to offer them full time because budget.
And that is the sex ed field.
And I know this has nothing to do with nothing, but I always think about when Queen Latifah had her talk show, right? And she found out she was canceling it, or like it was canceled for whatever reason. It was like the beginning of a fall, like the end of this quarter, right? Like the fourth quarter is when she found out. She took it out of her pocket and made sure that everybody was paid until the end of the year.
Right.
And I know she has access to do that, but it makes me think about these white-led organizations. You have money, you have capital, you have social capital, you have the opportunity to call somebody that at least 1 or 2 degrees from some type of power. What does it look like to let somebody utilize that without doing a press release, without needing a kudos for it, but because they're already doing the work? Why create a similar initiative to this local organization over here because you have national pull?
Right. Like, what is it to say, don't fund me?
Right.
I actually haven't been doing this long. This is an idea that I came across. Actually, this state-based organization has been doing this for 15 years, has been doing this for 10 years in community. Take a look at them. And maybe we can partner under them if they so choose. Right. But really, you need to fund them because they are the ones who are actually doing this work.
Right.
And that's like that, what are you willing to give up conversation.
Right. And a lot of these local orgs are at risk of closing down, or imagining the orgs that have already shut down or had to shut down some sort of programming because of that lack of access, right? And the fact that you have these no barriers versus, us trying to do it at this local level and us still not being able to do it, but you're going to come in because you have multiple routes to do it. So for folks who, because I'm like, we'll go down this rabbit hole forever. I can talk to you forever about this. because unfortunately we have enough receipts to continue to talk about
So
this.
many receipts.
But it's good.
It's
I'm
longer than
glad we're
those
having the
CVS ones.
conversation. Listen, it's a CVS one. It's a Stop and Shop one with the coupons and all of that.
Yes.
So in terms of you, I want to, like, I see the joy twofold, right? Because you're a founder of your own consulting firm. You stepped out on your purpose and was like, I'm gonna make this happen. What better time than now? During a time when folks are struggling in their own ways, right? And you like showed up for yourself.
And I will admit that there is a large level of privilege to be able to do that. And so I am not even going to not, I am in a 2-house income household. My partner, federal government, you gotta damn near kill someone to get fired from the federal government. And so,
maybe
I was good. I was able to, able to do it. And so I do want to acknowledge that piece because,
I appreciate that because it's also us recognizing most of the privilege. I can't speak for you, but I'm like, most of the privileges that we have are earned, right? It's not something that we magically obtained. It was earned, or it was like generational, like, okay, maybe I'm 1 or 2 generations from having some type of
not
access.
only that, but like to be seen in the sex ed field for me. People talk about, I talk about the different roles that I've had. I've been a trainer, I've been a facilitator, I've worked in policy, I've done programs. The only reason I did all of that was because no one, like, I couldn't get another job without having done the other thing.
Yep.
So no one actually saw me as a policy person until I had been a curriculum person or I had done these trainings, or whereas people are showing up at the table fresh out of college and I'm like, you don't know shit. But here I am, had to do all of these different things just for you to acknowledge that I had the skill set to be able to do these things. And so to your point, yes, it is earned. Like, you have to work hard. That statement about, twice, 3 times as good as the next white person, that is legit. Because especially in these white-led organizations, it's not enough to have the education or the job experience. You've got to have both, and you have to have so much more than everyone else
to get what people get at baseline.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. So then, now that you're here, showing up for yourself, doing take root strategies, what are the things that give you joy that people should seek you out for? Because now you can choose. Now you don't have to do the things that are, told to by, micromanaged or, any type of organization or a grant, right? What are the things that you want folks to contact you for that give you joy in that sense?
The things that give me so much joy is anything related to access. And like policy, you say shimmy, Marietta says sparkle. I'm gonna say vibrate. Like, I get so much vibration from policy things, whether it is drafting bill legislation. I will draft someone a model legislation in a heartbeat and love it. It's something I can do over dinner and then I'll be done. I can get it done really quickly. I work with school districts on policy. I can tell you what your landscape would be and kind of where you should be focusing policy wise in your community or in your state. Or, because I've had to do a lot of different things, I got another contract where I'm just training health educators, right? I enjoy training. So right now, one of the contracts that I work with is with the Department of Juvenile Justice in South Carolina, training them to facilitate sex education with their young people who are in DJJ in South Carolina. So doing trainings with adults. I love adult learning, and so I'm here to do trainings. So policy, education, and trainings are the things that bring me the most joy. Yeah. I also like working with organizations that don't always have, they don't have the national kind of brand or visibility. Organizations that want to do policy but don't have the capacity. And so here I am. you are a community-based organization thinking of doing policy, state-based organization thinking of doing policy, but don't have the budget to bring on a full-time person, I'm happy to help strategize and think through what a policy work could look like to get you to a place to where you can eventually bring on someone to carry it. So that's what I'm doing in Michigan right now.
That's beautiful. And hopefully look, continue to hire her. And if you want to do full time, hire her to help with the process of onboarding folks, right? Like that's what it sounds
That's
like.
right.
Help support that space and
That's
the
exactly
infrastructure
right.
when it comes to policy, right?
That's right.
See? So I'm going to put all your information in the podcast notes because everyone needs to know about some Jennifer Driver. Like, I'm excited, and it brings me joy how clear you are in your intentions and knowing what it is you want to do. Because I know when I was a baby sex person, nobody really spoke to us about what it would look like to choose the things that you don't have to work at a nonprofit if you don't want to. Some people find joy in that, right? Like, or you don't have to be a PhD if that's not where your joy is.
Right. I don't see a PhD in my future. One, it's expensive. Two, I'm not the best student, right? And so like that's not where I see my future. But at the same time, I know that there is a place for me in all of this work. And so, one of the things that I often had told my students when I teach is like, find where your place is and then determine what's needed in order to kind of be in that space. And for me, a PhD is not needed for where the things that bring me joy. And so I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I like, to me, that's beautiful because it shows that there are multiple journeys and destinations in this work, and it doesn't have to be, whatever cookie cutter frame you thought it was, or for a lot of us that were disillusioned, being like, oh, there's nothing, you can't strive in this field. You either have to accept whatever, position it is and whatever lack of power, and then you just have to stay there because survival, etc. But like, if we have the privilege and access to be able to stand in our purpose, what would it look like? And to me, you model that, right? Like,
I think also, it's easy to have these organizations dictate for you what your future should look like. And once I stopped that, I felt a little bit more free. I know that happened for me early on in my career. I was like, okay, well, I need a college education, which I knew that. I needed a master's degree. And I almost went and did a CHES, and I was like, wait, do I need that?
Right.
And so I didn't. Some people may need it and may want it. Do you, but do it because that's what you need and what you want, not because you're trying to fulfill something for an organization who may or may not keep you or have your best interest. And so that was something that I had to learn.
Absolutely. So then with that, on the personal level, where are you centering your joy now, aside from, the joy in creating your own magic? Where's your
on the personal level, my joy. So I just put up these holiday decorations behind me today. It's not Thanksgiving, which I don't actually celebrate, but like, whatever. I put up these decorations, so that brought me joy today. For me, I thought that like the human interaction, I needed that. And like COVID has really taught you to kind of, that you can't have the human interaction. So what's, I think, bringing me the most joy personally is like rediscovering what makes me happy. And like, for me, it's like sitting with myself. I've been meditating a lot more, and like just finding, kind of peace within the quiet that I've been kind of forced to have. And now I actually just enjoy it, just like sitting in silence, which I love. And I didn't really appreciate before, everything that had happened. COVID. So I am enjoying that. And I'm enjoying my partner. Um,
Yes.
Today's her birthday, so happy birthday, Shavina.
Happy
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of that is kind of just bringing me joy.
Good,
And
good.
you're like I live in DC. I'm in a tiny apartment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's two of us, so you got to really love the person you're with when you're in this
Listen.
little apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there is joy in that we have made it 11 months now, however long COVID has happened.
Right.
And we are still really happy, and we're still here. So that's
Look,
good.
that's a big deal.
It really is. This is a lot of time together. And
Yes.
so, yeah.
It feels like its own like retreat. Like, how do we communicate and love each other
That's
and give each other
exactly right.
space? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Give each other space in a 500 square foot apartment. Like, what does space look like?
Right,
You know?
right.
So,
Yes. And look, I don't know what 2021 will bring us, but I know folks don't want to hear, but I'm like 2020 isn't by itself. Isn't it? It isn't this one time iteration. It's what is the future looking like now that we've had all of this? Like,
that's
how do we
so
bring that
true.
into 2021 and continue to adapt and recognize that, like, we have no control over a lot of things that we were comfortable in.
That's right.
Yeah.
You had no control. But also, like, what have we learned from 2020? That we
Mm-hmm.
need to make some significant changes,
Mm-hmm.
um, both in our society, our structures, our institutions, our work, the way we do our work, the way we live our lives.
Yeah.
What I always knew, but was also reinforced, is how um, Black and brown folks have always centered around community. And that
Mm-hmm.
has really elevated for me in 2020. You always knew it, like I knew it inherently, but to
Yeah.
see people taking care of each other during this time has just been
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's something that I just really love seeing. I love my people, and like
Listen.
it's been really beautiful. And
Yeah.
so,
It's fortifying, and I'm super grateful for. We can't have no face to face interact, like, skin to
yeah,
skin, but we can have face to face and check in the ways that we can while we're navigating whatever this is.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, for sure.
I know, because I saw you last week and I was like, hi, I missed
Look,
you.
a lot of these calls I would not make. Like, it's almost like that meme, like, who's coming? Who's going? Who's going
Hmm.
to get that call? Okay.
I was like, wait, hold on. Tell me who's coming. Nope, I'm not going. That's all right. You keep that.
Like, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Hmm.
I'll be here in my stillness.
Yes.
In my stillness. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to make this an incredible teachable moment on so many levels and layers. And it's making me think and process about where I need to look into in terms of local and what power we have that sometimes we forget that we can play a part in this system, as fucked up as the system is.
The one thing I will leave everyone with
Mm-hmm.
is a call for more folks in policy. It
Mm.
may not be a thing that you had thought about, like, oh, there is like a role or a space for me in policy, and
Yeah.
maybe I need to look into that, or what type of policy could I do? Because I think it's a really wide range. But
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I show up at a lot of these spaces, I am one of the very few folks of color around the table. Um, and I firmly believe if the folks around the table don't look like you, they're not representing the community. They're not going to be serving the community that you come from. Um, and so I just would love to see more sex ed, Black and brown folks doing policy. And so if anyone is wanting to do that, please let me know, because we need you
Yeah,
doing some of that
yeah.
policy
Let's get
space.
some policy folks here to contact Jennifer Driver, to contact Take Root, so that we can Voltron on the policy wavelength.
Yes.
I can learn from you and I can help in whatever capacity that I can help to. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Um, for all, you know, what is it? What's the word? Thank you everyone for listening. If you got some questions, I'm like, what's the word of wrapping up? I'm like, if you have questions, please contact sexonshuffle@gmail. Please get in contact with Jennifer Driver for all your policy needs around sex ed, reproductive health, justice, rights, centering Black and brown folks and their needs and access. All y'all local folks, we got folks that'll help you with the alley-oop if you need support around policy. If that's your growing edge, we have somebody who is ready, willing, and able. Jennifer, thank you again. I appreciate you with all of my heart. I send you all my shimmies, and I hope you have so much fun celebrating your lover today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.